What if one of rock's greatest legends was not lost to destiny, but to a series of disregarded signs, ill-fated decisions, and spine-tingling blunders? Lynyrd Skynyrd's last flight has been a legend for decades, haunting fans. But beyond the tabloid headlines is a detail so avoidable, it not only raises an eyebrow, it turns the knife. This is not a story of legends falling like a blaze of glory, it's one of a choice made too late, and a warning that was missed that changed everything. Years before the flames and the headlines, there was a moment, a pivotal, turning moment, that had the potential to change music history. Was it ignored? Misunderstood? Or something that no one had the guts to confront, until it was much, much too late? By the mid-1970s, Lynyrd Skynyrd was the reigning king of Southern rock, mixing raw guitar riffs with emotional, country-inspired narratives. Formed in Jacksonville, Florida, the group came from modest beginnings and a series of name changes to become a national sensation. Their legendary lineup, Ronnie Van Zant, Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, Leon Wilkeson, Billy Powell, and Artemis Pyle, developed a frantic sound that resonated with an entire generation. Early successes such as Gimme 3 Steps, Tuesday's Gone, and Simple Man served to spread their popularity well beyond the South. But it was Free Bird, with its gut-level lyrics and screaming guitar solo that would prove to be the band's all-time anthem, cherished by concert audiences, demanded night after night, and yelled at live performances to this day. The release of Street Survivors on October 17, 1977, 3 days before the crash, was a creative peak. With guitarist Steve Gaines added to the lineup, the band achieved new heights of technical skill and dynamism. The album rose into the charts, with hits such as What's Your Name and That Smell, the latter named after a drunk driving wreck that Rossington had been involved in. The album artwork, ominously prescient, depicted the band on fire, a sight that would soon take on tragic meaning. Insiders felt the band was poised to burst into a higher level of fame. But behind the scenes, tensions built. Would they exhaust themselves too quickly, too soon? Days hence, that would be answered in the blackest possible terms. While they were at the height of their power, an underappreciated decision was already propelling them toward disaster. The aircraft that killed Lynyrd Skynyrd, a 1948 Convair 240, was well beyond its useful life. It had flown more than 29,000 hours and did not have safety features in place. The plane had a questionable flight history and had been sold several times. In 1977, it was no longer deemed reliable or suitable for commercial flights. Worse still, another group of musicians, Aerosmith, had turned down the very same plane months before. Their administrators canceled a rental agreement after seeing the pilots drinking while being inspected. That move could have preserved their lives. But Lynyrd Skynyrd's crew either overlooked or ignored those warning signs. The plane was convenient, it kept the band out of their truck and on schedule. Ronnie Van Zant was particularly dedicated to not letting their southern constituency down. After a flight from Lakeland to Greenville, when they could see engine problems, warnings were ignored. Cassie Gaines, already afraid to fly, had thought about going along in the equipment truck instead. In the end, she was talked back onto the plane. Ironically, the band was already talking about converting to a Learjet. But that idea came one flight too late. On October 20, 1977, they took the Convair 240 on its final flight, a flight that would take 6 lives and shake the foundations of rock history. Perhaps most haunting is the sense of foreboding surrounding lead singer Ronnie Van Zant. For months, he reportedly told friends, bandmates, and journalists he wouldn't live to see 30. His father remembered Ronnie saying, "Daddy, I'll never be 30 years old," so often it began to feel like conviction. Artemis Pyle recalled Ronnie telling him in Tokyo, "I'm going out with my boots on." He would tragically die in the crash at 29. Cassie Gaines was also afraid of the plane. Having witnessed sparks shoot out of one of the engines, she had plenty of grounds for concern. When she spoke up about her fear, though, it was Van Zant who comforted her with the now famous phrase, "If it's your time to go, it's your time to go." That fatalism, one shared by numerous band members, is now a grim icon of the disaster. Van Zant's wife Judy would later disclose that when she heard of the crash, she already knew he had not survived. "He told me so many times, I knew he really meant it," she would say. Fate, intuition, or chance, Van Zant's consistent warnings of premature death have lent a ghostly mask to the band's last days. Mechanical failure was the initial complaint. But in fact, the reality, uncovered in the NTSB report, was much more tragic. The aircraft had run out of fuel. The pilots had not checked fuel levels, had disregarded engine trouble signs, and flown the aircraft with settings that consumed too much fuel. In a last-ditch effort to balance fuel, the pilots inadvertently jettisoned what fuel they had left. After that, disaster was inevitable. This was not bad luck, it was human mistake. Worse, the band had already planned to replace the plane. Why didn't they do it earlier? Was it pressure, expense, or misplaced confidence? We will never know. But the tragic irony is obvious, their plan of escape was one flight too late. The Greenville flight took off normally. Band members slept. Others played cards. But trouble broke out when Artemis Pyle went to the cockpit and was asked to get back to his seat in an urgent tone. And then, the abhorred words, the flight had run out of fuel. The engine sputtered, one after another. As the plane rolled down toward silence, survivors remembered a macabre serenity. There was no screaming. Only prayer and resignation. The fall came violently in a forest swamp outside Gillsburg, Mississippi. The impact was later described by survivors as 1,000 baseball bats crashing into the fuselage. The plane disintegrated, the cockpit tore loose, and pieces littered the forest. Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, and 3 other people were killed. Others were thrown from the wreckage or trapped underneath it, severely injured. A victorious tour ended in disaster and quiet. The crash area was a nightmare. Bleeding and disoriented survivors crawled through the wreckage. Billy Powell, seriously wounded, heard the calls of bassist Leon Wilkeson, who was trapped in the wreckage. Broken ribs prevented Artemis Pyle from crawling through the dark forest to seek assistance. When he came to a farmhouse, the occupant, believing him to be an intruder, shot him. He called emergency services only after hearing plane crash. Rescuers found wreckage, bodies scattered, groans in the dark, and pandemonium all around. Numerous survivors had no idea who was alive or dead for hours. Pain, confusion, and trauma defined one of the darkest nights in rock history. Word of the crash took time to filter out. It wasn't until Walter Cronkite read it on CBS Evening News that the majority of fans heard the truth. Victim identification didn't come until the next day, compounding the sorrow. A wave of sorrow washed the country. Fans camped out. Radio stations broadcast Skynyrd around the clock. The music community mourned. Lynyrd Skynyrd was not just a band, they were the voice of a generation. And with their death came the closing of a very important, raucous chapter in American rock. For a group that established its reputation on honesty and availability, the emotional bond with listeners proved to be horribly intense. The ominous premonition of a fatal destiny resonated in Street Survivors, which reached stores just days prior to the crash. As shoppers took it from the shelves, the music resonated with a haunting new significance. Songs such as "That Smell," once a warning song about irresponsible living, were now seen through the eyes of death and loss. The first album cover, showing the band surrounded by flames, outraged the public and was immediately removed from shelves. It was swapped with a less graphic picture, but the harm had already been done. The album became a hit, reaching number 5 on the Billboard 200 and ultimately double platinum. The disaster forever solidified the band's position in music history, their legacy intertwined with overwhelming tragedy and survivors' guilt. Even now, the tragedy is one of rock's most chilling tales. Public grief spread beyond Lynyrd Skynyrd's music, with fans mourning lives cut short and wondering if the disaster might have been avoided. The painful physical damage to the members of Lynyrd Skynyrd who survived the crash was wrenching. Guitarist Gary Rossington, a founding member of the band, suffered numerous serious injuries: 2 broken arms, a broken leg, a punctured stomach and liver, and numerous broken ribs. While he was the sole remaining original member who continued to tour with the band later in his life, his body never healed. He had chronic pain and ongoing heart problems that resulted in numerous surgeries throughout his life, and his health issues persisted until the passing of the original lineup when he died in 2023. Bassist Leon Wilkeson came very close to death many times during the rescue. He had a crushed chest, facial injuries, and a twisted arm that nearly cut his music life short. However, he got back on stage in the 1980s with reformed Skynyrd. Nevertheless, his health was not strong. He survived several heart attacks and had to play using custom braces to prop up his battered arm. Wilkeson passed away in 2001, from chronic liver and lung disease being the officially stated cause, although most thought the residual effects of the crash were to blame. Alan Collins, one of the co-composers of some of the band's most signature songs, would go on to suffer a crippling car accident in 1986, which paralyzed him from the waist down. He was driving drunk at the time, killing his girlfriend in the accident. While he regained some function as a guitar player eventually, his body and soul never healed. He passed away in 1990 due to pneumonia complications exacerbated by his paralysis. The survivors bore more than bodily wounds, the psychic wounds were equally deep. Watching friends die like that and then going on under the burden of public remembrance left wounds that no therapy could ever completely undo. Their efforts to get back to making music came with a high price. The crash took none of their lives, but it irrevocably altered